Welcome to TheatreMix training, designed to revolutionize the way you manage wireless mics and streamline your theatrical productions. I'm Dan Nagel, founder and CEO of Tech Direction, and today's training is proudly hosted by the Tom Patterson Theatre at Stratford Festival, with a special thanks to IATSE 357 for making this event possible. We're thrilled to be joined by James Holt, the developer of TheatreMix. With years of experience mixing live audio for theatrical productions, James set out to create a solution to the challenges he faced. TheatreMix is the result of that endeavor, a tool that simplifies managing numerous wireless mics, automates DCAs programming, and enables advanced scene management, making tech weeks less hectic and allowing you to focus on the mix, not just the scenes. James continues to mix shows using his own software and is eager to share his insights and expertise with audio engineers around the world. Today, we'll learn how to navigate TheatreMix and build our first show on any supported console. Whether you're dealing with multiple wireless mics or looking to enhance your scene management workflow, this session will provide you with the knowledge and tools you need. We're here to support you in your journey to mastering TheatreMix and elevating your theatrical productions. For more information, resources, or to get in touch with our team for any theater tech needs, visit our website at techdirection.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you're working on a project and would like a quote or consultation to make sure you get the right technology, email us at projects@techdirection.com. Let's get started with a brief roadmap of how TheatreMix was conceived and what problems it's designed to solve. Take it away, James.
Thanks, Dan, and also the team at Tech Direction, but also the Stratford Festival folks. Looks like it's a stunning venue, and I hope to see it in person someday. So for today's session, I'm going to have three sections. I'm going to start off with some background on mixing sound for theatre and the origins of TheatreMix, and then move on to a live demo with a couple of consoles, and then hopefully finish up with a Q&A. So theatre's all about telling stories. As theatre makers, we want to immerse the audience in the world and take them on a journey, which is a complex and delicate art. But we want to communicate this to a large audience. And to maintain the artistic integrity of the show, we can't have obtrusive mics. We want the audience to build relationships with the characters on stage, but this is difficult if all the cast are holding microphones like news reporters. Shows also can't feel obviously reinforced like a rock concert. I mean, there are some exceptions, but generally we're aiming for nuance over brash spectacle. So what we end up doing is we put these little omnidirectional microphones on actors' heads. They can be in the hairline, or in earrings, or headsets, but the priority is for the mics to be visually unobtrusive, and basically the distances should be hidden. We end up in a scenario that's quite different to vocalists in bands and other music performances who heavily integrate handheld mics into their performance, where the artists themselves can control when and how their voice is heard through how they control mic placement. For theatre actors, they have to surrender that element of their performance to this little discrete microphone fixed somewhere on their heads. They have no control whatsoever over when and how loud they're heard. Therefore, the sound operator for a theatre show becomes an integral part of storytelling. When we're doing a theatre show, we have to reinforce the action on stage in a way that's transparent. Often there's lots of mics to manage. It's not uncommon to have a cast of 20 to 30. When mics are used in close proximity, we want to minimise comb filtering, but also when there's lots of characters in a scene, we also want to minimise the amount of ambient noise that's picked up. Omnidirectional microphones both exhibit these kind of behaviours. We also want to accommodate the dynamics of performers, both individually and relative to each other, and relative to the band if it's a musical. The level that an actor is delivering and the level that's artistically appropriate at a certain point in the show will change constantly. Overall, the aim is to keep the audience immersed in the story. So in the 80s, the top-end shows on Broadway and the West End converged on this thing called line-by-line mixing. But how do you mix all the lines when there's 20 microphones but you only have two hands? So let's briefly touch on the concept of VCAs. So VCAs are voltage-controlled amplifiers. So when you have a VCA fader on an analog console, there's actually no signals going through it. What you're doing is setting a variable DC voltage that's pushed into ICs in each of the channel strips. So those individual channels ICs use the voltage from the VCA fader and also the channel fader together to set the overall level for each channel. So say if a channel fader is set to nominally 0 dB, but it's a member of a VCA is set to minus 10 dB, the channel will be sent into groups and buses and so forth at minus 10 dB. I like to think of it as a bit like a remote claw. You move a VCA fader and it's like this claw comes out of the console and it's pushing the channel faders for you. The key thing to remember is that VCAs don't hold any signals, but they allow you to remote control other signals. Compared to, say, groups and buses, which do have some level of controls, but their main purpose is processing and routing. On digital consoles, VCAs are also known as DCAs or control groups, depending on the manufacturer. For most other sound reinforcement applications, VCA assignments are typically static. So if you think of like a band, you might have a drum kit, bass, some guitars, keys, lead vocals, backing vocals. These roles don't tend to change much throughout the show. But back in the 80s, the top-end theatre shows found a way to exploit VCAs quite differently. So instead of having the VCAs just statically manage a group of channels, the idea was the VCAs, you pull into the VCAs the mics that you're using for a particular scene, and then push them away when not in use. So the operator stays in one part of the console and they're mixing on these 8, 12, whatever VCAs. They're dynamically reassigned as the show goes on without having to get the rest of the console, but it allows a very, very detailed level of control as to how these mics are turned on and on, how they're mixed. We can exactly, depending on the show, you might be mixing line by line. They might be turned on just when they're talking, or they might be, ducked in and out or left on, or just for certain scenes. The level of detail depends, but essentially the idea is that you've got real control of these, real control of the mics under your fingers. So in this kind of context, when you've got the sound operator having to be part of the story, having to follow along the script or the score, and pushing mics in and out, really detailed, it's sort of you end up treating the sound console a bit like a musical instrument, I find. Particularly in the analog world, there's a real physical, like a real spatial mapping of like where the controls are on the console to how that affects the mix. If you want to grab an EQ control, you know exactly where that is for a particular character. You know where as the show goes on, under your fingers, you know where characters are going to fall based on the VCA programming. By moving the faders, you can sort of achieve a sonic outcome that varies from night to night, and allows you to adapt to the actors' performances. So I guess most top-end shows kept this workflow with analog consoles until the late 2000s. The big top-end attempt was a very, very long time to switch to digital. So that covers how like the top-end shows managed radio mics, but what about the rest? What about other theatres? This is where things I find quite interesting. This doesn't get talked about a lot because things diverge quite a bit, sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I found. So, wireless mics, throughout the 90s, wireless mics became more available, but they're still quite expensive. It wasn't, I don't know about the rest of the world, but at least in Australia, it wasn't until sort of the early 2000s that productions were able to afford them in reasonable numbers. And so for smaller theatres, smaller productions, as the number of radio mics grew, they started to encounter the same problems that the big pro shows had, 10, 15 years earlier. This is a problem, though, because VCAs specifically were only really available on like the real high-end consoles, the real massive frames, the real big touring consoles. So some like bigger regional theatres may have had consoles with VCAs, but your smaller theatres, you might get a 24, 30-something channel frame. You're not going to have VCAs. Becomes very difficult to control. But at the same time this happened, though, there are all these kind of digital studio consoles being released. Things like this. Principally Yamaha. There are other brands too, but these kind of small digital consoles, ideally designed for studio use, they sort of came out in the late 90s, early 2000s. A few of them happened. And so for smaller theatres, they were very appealing because you've got, from a price to feature point of view, you've got all this stuff, not so much you're replacing outboard like you do today, but back then it was like you had outboard. You've got compression, you've got EQ, all these things. They were very powerful for their time. But they had a problem because they were designed for studio use primarily. They didn't have any sort of VCAs, DCAs, control groups, fader groups. The only way to control channels was directly with the input faders. And so if you wanted to run, 20 or so mics on one of these consoles, number one, you're dealing with all the faders, but you can't get to them. They're all buried under layers. It's very difficult to try and mix something live with 20 mics when you can't access all the faders and you're paging back and forth, and it's a mess. So this thing kind of fundamentally broke this, the pro shows continued this musical relationship. The operator had a very musical connection to the show and to the score. But if you're using one of these consoles, you can't have that because you can't physically get there. The layers and everything get in the way. And so when faced like this, it's kind of appealing to think about managing sound like lighting. You press a button, let the magic box switch all the things, but it's far from appropriate for a theatrical show. I mean, this sort of thing, obviously, if the button's not pressed at the right time, you clip off lines. Levels of very variable from night to night. Actors may be weak or strong, or the band may be up or down. Lots of things change night to night in a theatre show, and if you've programmed everything in, you can't get that. As well, too, if you're just doing mute automation, you get jumps on the noise floor. Little mics on people's heads do pick up a lot of ambient noise, so it's really distracting for the audience. Takes them out of the story. So what do you do? So when you have to control something like this, but there's no spatial mapping to where all the things are, you kind of treat it as a bit like an autonomous machine. It's a bit of a black box. Sound goes into the sound signals going into the magic box. It does stuff. You press a button and magic sound comes out apparently somehow. But I feel what this sort of created was people ended up kind of learning from fear, because if you've programmed everything into one of these boxes and you can't really access what it's doing during a show, you're sort of pressing recall and just hoping it's going to be okay. It's not a great place to be when you're mixing a very live dynamic show. And so the thing I find about not tragic, but the thing that's hard about these is that it led a lot of people to believe that mix automation for theatre is very mechanical. Unless you're working at the very top end, it's very the tools available. All you could do was do this kind of very mechanical based recall, which is not really suited to theatre shows. So we have here this kind of bifurcation of control paradigms. This is a super simplified diagram, but essentially, in the 80s, everybody sort of started off on like basic analog consoles, and then the pro world went to like your CADAX with VCAs, eventually to Digico in the sort of 2000s. Other manufacturers as well, but this is like the most common path. But then if you were a smaller theatre and you wanted to have digital control of your radio mics, in the 90s, you might have experimented with like an O1V kind of console or the other similar ones. 2000s, this kind of leads to the LS9 or DM2K sometimes, those kind of digital consoles. Again, not picking on Yamaha for any particular reason, but that's they're the ones that are most well known. And so we end up with sort of, on the one hand, you've got people mixing, having a very musical focus on how theatre's mixed. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got a very mechanical way and very, very sort of programmatic way of mixing theatre, which is not particularly useful. But at the same time, all this was happening, there was something happening interesting in the middle. There were these other consoles were coming out around this time that were sort of a bit of both, but not necessarily designed for one or the other. Cool, we'll come back to that. So a bit about me. So like a lot of sound people, I have a background in music. I was trained, I had classical piano training when I was in school. But as a kid, I was always interested in sort of lighting and sound, probably more than the music I was supposed to be performing. So when I started high school, the head student tech there at the time introduced me to the local theatre company, which sort of had like a youth theatre thing. There's like an unofficial tech stream. We were going to acting classes, but in practice they just let us, run around the theatre, kind of unsupervised. It's really fun. So in these years, like around my high school years, I ran sound for a few concerts, reviews, a musical or two. But I gave this up in my penultimate year of high school to focus on studies and all academic stuff. So once high school was done, I picked to do a very technical university course, a double degree in computer science and communication engineering. So I needed something creative to complement that, because I was very technical during the day, and I wanted to have something completely different to balance my life. So sort of mid to late 2000s is when I sort of started taking theatre sound a bit more seriously, doing it for fun, obviously, but also trying to get into how it worked and all that sort of stuff. Which is about where we left the timeline. So in 2012, this thing was released. Like most people, when Behringer announced this console, didn't really expect it to be a serious product. So I sort of ended up buying one for shits and gigs, I guess. So it was about $2,500. And it's like, okay, well, it can't be any worse than an O1V. So, worst case, I end up with a slightly fancy O1V. I could use it for small gigs or something. Didn't really have any intention of using it for theatre because, again, it's Behringer, right? It's not going to be great. And so Actually, the first gig I used it on was a streaming sports broadcast. We were doing interstate, and the console arrived literally as I was on my way to the airport. So we picked up this console from the shop at the airport and went to the airport, stuck it on a plane, and then just did this gig interstate. And to take it out of the box and just have it work, and it was amazing how powerful this thing was. Like I was expecting, I had an analog rig as well to fall back on, but taking this thing out of the box, using it for a live sports streaming thing, which is some commentary and effects mics and playback and all that sort of stuff. And it worked really well. So I ended up, kept it on for like the live stream stuff and a couple of concerts and things. But when I tried to think about using it for theatre, though, I kind of hit a wall. Because at the time, looking research on the internet type of thing, trying to find out how to mix theatre on a kind of digital console, all the signs point to this kind of mechanical way of automating shows, which is what I mentioned before. But to me, coming from a music background, this whole very sort of programmatic, very programmatic heavy, press the button, it'll do it for you. All that stuff, instinctively, I felt that wouldn't be appropriate. And so at the time, I had like this vague idea of how DCA mixing sort of worked for theatre conceptually, but hadn't really explored it that much. So I sort of put it on ice for a couple of years. I had this console, but I didn't use it for theatre shows. I just use it for other gigs. So around 2014, there was a seminar here in Melbourne run by Andrew Bruce from Autograph, talking about theatre software and sound design. So it was quite interesting because he talked about the story behind how sound to musical theatre was developed over the decades, and how products were adapted to suit the theatre workflow. For me, that was really interesting, talking about the whole process rather than the specific products that were there that I couldn't afford. So after sort of getting that kind of insight into how the pro world work, my challenge became how to make this X32 console here, look more musical to control rather than mechanical. Because it was obvious it had the DSP was quite good. It was very powerful inside, but the natural sort of, at the time, the most people tended to try and do this kind of mechanical control of the desk rather than trying to interact with it musically. So like people who have used sort of these middle consoles here, I started programming scenes on the console, and it's very clunky. It's very easy to make mistakes. Specifically on the X32, you can't recall DCA labels and without recalling labels at the same time. So you end up mixing shows with no DCA labels, which is not great. But having said all that, even with the sort of the clunky console programming, what I found was that it allowed me to focus on the sound of the show. Previously on an analog desk, you'd be hunting around the desk for channels the whole time, doing bus reassignments. Like it was a very sort of, it was kind of musical, but not really, because without VCAs, you had to do a lot of the stuff manually yourself. So moving to a console with DCAs, even though it wasn't optimal, it did allow me far more control of the mix and much better outcomes sonically. So I started looking at just sort of like some third-party tools for scene management on these consoles, because surely someone else had done this, right? Surely someone else had tried to mix theatre and get work on the X32. But pretty much all that existed at the time was tools that you could just download a scene dump, edit it offline, and stick it back up on the console, which was powerful, but not really useful when you're in the middle of tech and you want to change some assignments and then run a number straight away. What was interesting, though, was the console came with a very well-documented OSC API. So that maybe I could hack some small program together to read my DCA plots and translate it into OSC commands towards the console. So following several weekends of coding and testing and caffeine and swearing and all those things, early 2016 I had version 1 of this thing I gave a kind of dorky name to, called X32 Theatre Control. So this is it on the second show it was ever used on. I couldn't find any decent photos in the first show, so this one's a bit prettier. But you can see here, this is very early days. We've got the kind of DCA grid is there. A bit of QLEM integration existed at the time, but not many features. And I think from memory, you couldn't even edit the show file in the GUI then, which is you had to edit the show file in a database editor and then import the file, and then it read and fired stuff into the console. But it worked. And so over time, I added some, a whole lot of small bits and pieces to help me when mixing, things like the squirrel strip colors and stuff like that. And then once I sort of became comfortable with the tool, then what was interesting was it allowed me to think creatively more about sound design. So being able to do stuff like position offsets for delay compensation and automating a lot of effects programming, which is stuff I could never thought about to do before. It was really cool. And anybody who saw me using it said, "Oh, this is great. What can I use it?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, maybe." And so after sort of polishing it for a while, I launched it publicly in May 2018. And so it's cool. Had lots of really good feedback from people who used it. It's fascinating to me that there's so many different subtleties in everybody's workflows and how they mix theatre shows, and so it was really cool to see how people managed to integrate it. And what I found, for me, made me happy was that and made DCA mixing much more accessible. It allowed people with not many resources to create really complex musical mixes on one of these little cheap consoles. How we do that, coming very soon. So I guess over the next couple of years, I added some more features based on feedback from users and things I needed in my own shows. But I guess one of the most requested things in my email was, can you make it work for this other thing? So the problem is, though, at the time, just getting it to work reliably enough on the X32, M32 consoles was plenty for me for a side project. I had my normal job, I had my theatre stuff, and I had this software thing on the side. So it only ever makes sense to add support for other consoles if I can get some commercial return. Because basically there's a lot of costs involved. I have to get buy hardware. I have to take time off my normal job to devote time to this to development testing, travel to customer sites, all that sort of stuff. So it was an idea in the back of my head, but not really something I was taking too seriously. And so around sort of early March 2020, I was on a trip to the US and UK, and I was actually planning to meet up with a bunch of people, probably some of them on this call, and sort of canvass the idea of a commercial version. Like, would you buy this? Would this make sense? But as we know, we all know what happened next in March 2020. So after cancelling most of my trip and being stuck at San Francisco airport at the gate waiting to board my plane home, I decided to buy another console for shits and gigs, because I knew I'd have to spend some time in isolation at home once I got back from the US. And a bit like with the X32, I was like, you know what, this I'm worst case, I end up with a small console I can use for random gigs. Could be, who knows? Let's see what happens. And so it turned out to be a lot harder than I expected to get this to work with other consoles. It's primarily because one thing that's really unique about the X32 is that it has a really open API, and it's also a really powerful API. It does what it says, and it can process commands super fast. Pretty much none of the other console manufacturers are willing to share the details of how their control protocols work. So it's a lot of decoding, a lot of time playing with apps and stuff, and trying to work out how these signals are working and trying to replicate what they do. But after a month or two of playing around with this on one console, I managed to get a test harness to work that actually controlled everything I need, which is kind of cool. So for those of you who aren't aware, in Melbourne, Australia, over 2020 and 2021, we had a series of really long lockdowns to control the virus. And when I say lockdown, I mean like you can't travel outside 5 kilometers of your home. Only one person can leave the house a day for groceries. All that kind of stuff. It was really, really strict. So I suddenly had a whole lot of time to try getting this to work on other consoles. Fortunately, my normal job continued. My normal job continued on work from home. So that part of my life was fine, but I didn't have any theatre stuff to do or anything else really. Just stuck at home for a good chunk of the year. So I ended up spending my evenings and weekends building all these drivers for consoles. And it was also at the time, because there were no events happening, lots of mates in the industry who had gear sitting in warehouses and shops and stuff were able to lend me things or let me use their consoles, which was cool. So in this sort of 2-year period, I sort of developed X32 theatre control features in parallel with the new console drivers, and a lot of the console abstraction stuff actually snuck its way into X32 theatre control around this time. There's no drivers for other consoles, but the framework started getting put in there. Anyway, so in late 2021, events started up in Australia. So after not quite 2 years of development, we could start some beta testing. So I've got focus again. So this here is a photo from early 2022. It's been tested on a CL3. If you look very closely, you can see that actually it's still called X32 Theatre Control at this stage. It's got all the old icons. But yeah, beta testing started then, and went for about 9-ish months of beta testing, and then it launched in November 2022. So the software's been out for about a year now. It's been used on countless shows, from amateur, school, university productions, all the way up to commercial runs on the West End and off Broadway, which is amazing, blows my mind. I honestly never expected this sort of software tool I made for my own little shows that would creatively empower lots of people to do their thing, and makes theatre sound a better experience for lots of people worldwide. It's been a super fun experience, and so I look forward to what comes next. So now, demo time. This is all right, so the Snow Queen. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use a pantomime. This is the same file that's available on the website. Obviously, the software is intended to be used on big musicals that we all know and love, or plays as well. But for demonstration purposes, I'm using something that's less likely to infringe people's intellectual property rights. So this is a little bit simplified because I guess for this particular show, this was about 6 years ago. It was a while ago now. And so there were no mic swaps in this show. So every character that you see here had their own radio mic. They weren't swapped during the show. We'll cover how to manage swaps a bit later on. So the mic plot was fairly straightforward in that every character had a mic. They're all pretty laid out here, and there were no swaps, and it's all pretty cool. So this mic plot was done beforehand with the cast list, working out who has speaking parts, who has singing parts, and then assigning a microphone to each of them. So when you first create a new show file in TheatreMix, you'll be presented with this screen. You can type out all the character names, give them a default ensemble if you want, select the number of DCAs you're going to control, and so forth. Cool. So this show is actually designed before the Fader Gang feature existed for X32, which is why it's only 7 DCAs. These days, at least me personally, I tend to use at least 8 to 10 DCAs for most shows. That's sort of the sweet spot. Cool. So if we jump across to the script. So in this show, we've just finished a song. The Queen Thief character has just been introduced, and now we're going to have some dialogue with some of the characters. All right, so if we get in the show file, so down here, so we've just had fight song. The Queen Thief's just sung fight song with Black Eye supporting character, and we've had some ensembles, the male and female, and there's some thieves there as well. So when assigning DCAs, there's sort of two schools of thought here. There's one is that you try and keep the same characters consistently assigned to each DCA. And the other way is you sort of assign in script order. So as the characters appear in the script, you sort of do it left to right. So it's really easy to move forward. Both of them have their place. The first one is really good for spatial mapping. If you have a show with a lot of lead characters in the same scenes together, you end up with like your fingers get used to where the characters land. But on the other hand, if you have a show with lots of random people moving around, then sometimes the second one makes more sense because you can't maintain consistency. So, but at least if at least it's left to right, then it kind of, you can kind of know where we are. When I was preparing this, I was looking back at this old show file and I found so many inconsistencies. So I should probably make a better one. But anyway, for this exercise now, we're just going to go through and do the second way, do it in scene order. So we've got the Queen Thief here, and she's the first one to talk. So we can actually just fill that down with Command D. The next person to speak is Granny. So if we type in Granny, there she is. The next person to speak is Jack. We have Jack. The next person to speak is Kai. So these 4 characters have been allocated DCAs. This Q17, it already existed, but I would have created it. And so by doing this, we've allocated these mics to DCAs. Any other mics that are under control of TheatreMix have been muted. So only these 4 mics will be unmuted when this cue's fired, and they'll be automatically assigned to these DCAs, and all the labels will be set. Everybody has a different way of marking up scripts. My way is probably a little bit crazy. But this is kind of like, cool, we've just entered Q17. We have pickups on 1, 2, 3, DCAs 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have lines here. And so pickups, obviously, when you bring it in, and then lines are, if you're doing line by line, you sort of pull the others down. If you're cheating or if you've got headset mics, you can get away with it. You don't have to pull the others down quite so much, but it's always good to know who's going to talk. And so, as you can see, DCA 1, 2, 3, 4, that's how we kind of marked up in scripts. Nice and easy. So again, similar thing here. Queen Thief, she's already talked. Thieves, they're the thieves talk. We already have some thieves. We had the thieves defined over here in this previous queue. So you can just copy paste if you want the thieves to go, say, here, and that copies them through. But we might want to reuse these thieves a few times in the show. We don't know. So if I actually delete them out of there, what we can do is we can define these thieves as an ensemble. So if I I'll just open this up first so you can have a look. So this is, in this thing, we have four characters: Troll, Michelle, Sandra, Trevor. They're the thieves. We might want to use them again later in the show. They might be like a recurring ensemble that happen. So what we can do is, if I'm trying to look at 3 screens at once, we can go to ensemble setup and we can add them in as an ensemble. So now we have the thieves defined and it's picked up the channels we assigned. You can also edit them in the screen. So all this does, it creates like a little group. It's not persistent, but the idea is once we've created this ensemble group of thieves, we can go here and then we can type thieves and it'll pick them up. And if we want to use them in any other queue, we can just say, yep, these are the thieves. Off we go. One disclaimer is that once you've written them into the queue, that's it. If you then go back to ensemble setup and change the members, it's not going to change anything in queues you've already done. It's really just a helper, because if you've got, some shows have like a Greek chorus or whatever that recur, it's kind of handy to have them there. So that's our thieves. And then what else? We have Jack. We already have Jack. Queen Thief. Gerda, she's new. If I can spell. Cool. Let's chuck in Gerda, Kai, Jack, Queen Thief, Gerda, Kai, Granny. Yep. The rest of them we already have. Yep. This scene just kind of continues. We pick up the thieves. We drop the thieves. Gerda, she's new. The rest of them are already on stage. So they're just going along as we go. No more changes. So now we go to the next page and a bit more action happens. So now the thieves come back briefly. Queen Thief talks, but then here they all exit. The four characters exit, and then Queen Thief exits as well. And so we now have this little bit of dialogue between Black Ice and Fairy Snow, and a sound effect too from my old markup. And so we've run out of DCAs for this scene because we've used up one for the thieves. We have 2 characters that are Black Ice and Fairy Snow. We need to cover for, but we're out of numbers. So it's time for a new queue. Let's call this one scene 8C. And because at this point the script's not great, but you can sort of see the others have all exited. So at this point we're just going to have Black Ice. Oops, I'm on the wrong screen. Black Ice and Fairy Snow. Everything is just Fairy. Yep. So for this last part of scene 8, it's just these 2 characters talking. So if we look in the script markup, same thing. So the thieves come back and they go away again, and then we have a bit more dialogue between those other 3 characters. Those 4 leave. The Queen Thief is the last one to talk. She leaves, and then we have a new queue. And so it does seem kind of strange to put a queue in the middle of a scene like this, but they're super fast. And particularly in this, it's a nice natural transition. The Queen Thief leaves, fade her out, snap, hit DCA, bring DCA 1 back in. It's a very, very quick operation. But then it allows you to just sort of cover this dialogue transition really nicely. Cool. So Black Ice, Fairy Snow, they talk to some sound effects and stuff. I won't cover the sound effects just yet, but yep. Stuff happens, and then they both exit. Cool. Last page. So now we're in a new scene, new characters. And so judging by what we've just done, you go, okay, cool. Tongs, hammer, here's some characters. Let's plot them in, off we go. This is going back to how we said before about there's different ways to approach this. So in this show, Hammer and Tongs were actually evil penguins. They always appear as a duo. There's always both of them at once. And so the convention that was used to program the rest of the show was Hammer's always first. and their dialogue is very fast paced, very back and forth. You kind of need to be on top of it. So even though Tong speaks first in this scene, in scene 9, what we're actually going to do is put Hammer first, because that way it's a Hammer and Tong scene. You can hear their voices. It makes them much more intuitive to mix. So Hammer and Tong is going to go back and forth, and this is different to what we had before because we're going to start with DCA 2, not DCA 1. But in the context of the show, it makes more sense. So I guess some things that are also obvious here is that there's automatic color coding of DCAs. So because in this cue we use the Queen Thief and she was in the cue before, her DCA will be colored green automatically. So the idea behind that is you can fire the cue with that DCA fader up and it's not going to change the sound. Which for this doesn't matter so much because it was coming out of a song, so there's a natural lull anyway. But sometimes if you having to sort of shuffle channels around and have multiple cues in a scene, it's handy to know which faders you don't have to duck out. Otherwise, things might get clipped or noise floor, all that sort of stuff. So that just happens automatically. If it's the same one, it'll color it green. There's other colors too. The purple one is one I made at the time. It made a lot of sense at the time when I made it, but now I'm not sure. This was designed for songs where you have leads coming in and out. So you have like a full company song. In this case, it was You'll Be Found. It was a full company song, but there was 2 sets of leads sitting solos. And so the transition between these 2 cues happened during a chorus. And so I wanted to make sure that, it was like as I took a breath, it was a fire, that kind of timing. So it didn't want any sort of sudden level changes. But as we went through to swap in the new round of soloists. So when that happens, this purple pinky color is used to indicate if all those purple pinky DCAs are at the same level and you hit a cue, it's not going to change anything because all they do is get swapped in and out. It's an edge case. It actually doesn't happen as often as I thought it would, but it is kind of handy for those kind of, usually it's top of the act, end of the act kind of songs, which are huge and you want to bring characters in and out. All right, let's try and connect to a console. Let's see what happens if I press the button. And we want this. Cool. So if I do this, and let's just go to cue line checks at the top. So as we can see here, we've got a whole lot of inputs on the left. They've all been labeled automatically. And in this line checks queue, which is in by default, no DCAs are assigned. Everything's unassigned. Everything's cleared out. It's a nice fresh one. So if I go next, we can, if I actually click on the screen and not on Zoom, that also helps. Here we are. In our first queue, and we've got scene 1, and there's our 3 DCAs all lined up there. Muted to you. Everybody else can hear me.
It's actually a great testament to that just worked. So, don't stress too much.
That's cool. I would have taken the channel out if I knew. Anyway, cool. And so you can go back and forth. And so likewise, I'm just controlling on the PC here, but you can also use buttons on the console. They're just out of frame, I think. But if you hit the bottom right assign button, so now we're advanced to the cues. So normally when you're mixing a show, your hands will be on the DCA faders, pushing them up and down as you need to for cues, and then you've got the console buttons to advance back and forth. One thing you can do that's kind of cool is you can edit stuff on the console. So if I just go back a cue, and if we spill DCA 7, please, just tap the select button for DCA 7. Cool. So now we've spilled out DCA 7, which is the female ensemble. And you know what? Some of them aren't singing. Some of them are out of tune. They don't know their words. It's pretty crap. So if you just mute one of those random channels on the left, please, just pick one and just mute it, and it's ditched. So now, because editing's unlocked in TheatreMix, you can mute or you can unassign DCAs on the console, and they'll automatically be updated in the show file. So we should have here under remove channel 11. So channel 11 was just dumped out of the queue. Maybe they weren't singing. Who knows? And so what that's really useful for is in tech when you've got maybe two or three rehearsals, you can just be mixing the show and you know what, this sounds bad. Edit this, and it all updates and it's all taken through. You can also disable this if you want to. Obviously, people may not like that feature, but yeah, the whole one of the main benefits of TheatreMix is it allows you to really iterate design during tech. Because often if you're using console scenes for this, it's kind of write once, and then if you need to update it, it's like, I'll take some notes, do it after the show, hope you don't break stuff. What was that? What was in the next scene? What have I missed? Kind of thing. And you can't really holistically look at like the whole show programming, because all you get is a list of scenes. You don't really know what they're doing until you actually fire them, and it's painful. Whereas with TheatreMix, you can iterate design really quickly. So we just added some cues before. Just then we didn't like how something was sounding, so we dumped some channels out of a DCA. It's really flexible, and the idea is it's kind of there to be a bit of a companion and make it really easy to work out where you are in the show and accept edits and be super flexible.
Sorry, I've got a couple of questions here. If we can,
Sure.
We can jump in. First off, I want to point out for all those that missed it, hovering on the undo is key to see what it's doing.
only for live
tell
updates.
you exactly what it's doing.
Most that's only if you've done stuff on the console. It's
great. So first question is, we can program the assignables within TheatreMix, correct?
Yes. So when you go to connect to a console, which I kind of glossed over before, you can pick what the assign buttons do. So you got back and go, and there's also things like mark queue, and also we'll get into the QLab stuff a bit later on. So when you set up to connect to a console, you can select which buttons do what. Yeah.
Cool. Are there limitations with different consoles on that, or?
The Allen and Heath consoles, I have to use mute groups, so you can only have 8 buttons there. That's the main one. Oh, and also TF series too.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Another question: how do you add channels to DCAs on the fly through the console only?
Oh, that's easy. No, that's all you have to do. No, seriously, it's actually. So on the X32, this is super easy, because all you do is you hold down the DCA, select you want to do, and then tap the select of the channel. You do that, you'll add a DCA in. So say, for instance, if we jump to what's this? Let's break interval. So we're in interval. So if you hold down unspill DCA 7, so just tap select again to unspill that. So now if you hold down, tap and hold, select for DCA 1, and then tap a channel select. Oh. And then tap a channel select. Yep, cool. We've now just added Jack to DCA 1. Done. You can add him in, and likewise you can do this. Yeah, and now if you spill him out, Jack's there. You can add other channels too. It's all simple, easy. Other consoles aren't quite so easy. Probably the next easiest one I can think of is like Yamaha QLCL. You can on the actual channel screen, you can tap the DCA. It's got to go in. That's really easy. Other consoles, I think actually, on the Advantis and D-Live, you can get to the grid. It's like you have to go to the routing tab. It's a bit of a double step. But yeah, it's there. You can add them in pretty easily. I guess the whole point is now to get the basic show running. Channels are assigned to DCAs. You can mix the show. It's all kind of the fundamentals are there. We can now sort of layer on some complexity. So say let's look at Jack here. We want to know where the guy playing Jack has said, you know what, he comes to the director and going, I'm sitting backup vocals in this song, but don't know if I can do it. I've got a costume change. I'm not sure if I can cover BVs in this song. So we want to find out where Jack's mic's being used. So we can go to channel utilization view. And so we can see here on the left, we have all the mics. On the top, we have all the scenes. So we can see here, Jack is used in these different scenes. And then in here we found Jack is singing in the male ensemble in that cue there. So maybe he can't make that. So we can go in here. Oh, this is really laggy, and we can take him out if we want. And we can take him out, and he's not singing in that song anymore because he can't make it. But that's all fine. And so you can track through through the show what all the mics are doing, what DCAs they're in. And also add them back in or not if you want. So, we want him back on DCA. We want him on DCA, let's say 6 here. We can put him there as well. We can put him back. So that, again, it's really powerful because you can see what's going on, right? It's really, normally it's really hard with scenes to see what's going on the console. With this, you can say, cool, let's look through all the cues. Where are people talking? This is super useful for understudies too. If you're working out where understudies are going to go, I will, if we have time, I'll cover move assignments, which is really powerful. You can split things up and move them around. Yeah, so that's a bit of inspection. So now we've done the basics. Let's one thing that's kind of really cool, really interesting in theatre is that if we're trying to go for a naturalistic sound and we want to delay mics as actors move upstage away from the PA system towards away from the audience, away from the PA, we often want to delay their mics to compensate for that. To for those who are aware, like the Haas delay thing, where the two sources have to arrive within a certain time to make it seem like they're real. And so one thing TheatreMix allows you to do is you can define these things called positions. So by default, you get a center stage position. Normally, it's default this is 2 milliseconds. But say we've got like I don't know, let's just say upstage. And upstage, when we do some tests, so say you measure this out, and upstage is, I don't know, let's pick a number, 15 milliseconds further away from your center stage position. So now, if we open up the positions column, so now we can say, okay, maybe in this Cold as Ice song, maybe Snow Queen is actually upstage. So maybe she's actually, if I actually select it. Yes. Oh, yep. Sorry, Dan, can you use Alt Tab? I've just done something incredibly stupid. Yeah, thank you. So maybe she's there. So when she's singing this song, we want her to sound like she's coming from upstage, not like she's coming from the PA system right next to the audience. We want to actually push her back in space a bit, so it feels more natural. So you can define positions there. You can define them in terms of delay and pan. You can also define them in terms of buses. So some people use buses for like different lead ensemble processing, or you might be using an external DSP to do some fancy position matrix stuff. But the point is with TheatreMix, if you want to make it sound more realistic, instead of having to dial into every single channel and set the delays manually, you can just say, cool, this person is standing here. It applies the delay. And it's particularly for smaller spaces, it's quite incredible, like how much that changes the design. Larger venues, not so much because there's more reinforcement. But in smaller venues, it can sound really natural. Cool. I'm just looking at the time. I might just cover a couple more things. Maybe we can go into the last few questions. So the next thing I want to sort of talk about is effects. So quite often for musicals, you want to have reverb for songs. You don't want to have reverb for continue. You want to have reverb for songs, but you want to have reverb for dialogue. Obviously, dialogue you don't want to be in a canyon. But also sometimes you might want the ensemble to have a different reverb patch to the lead singers. Maybe you want the ensemble to be a bit more spacey outy and the lead singers to be more focused. So you can control TheatreMix. You can control FX bus assignments. So let's say we've got 2 FX units on this show, FX1, FX2. And let's hypothetically say FX1 is like a short reverb, FX2 is like a long reverb. And so this Cold as Ice, this is actually a song, not a dialogue scene. So by default, that it assigns a bus. You can choose none, or you can pick one of the ones you've chosen. So by default, everyone's on FX1. But here in this scene, we don't want Kai to have reverb, so we can delete that. And likewise here. So there's a few different ways you can do this. I personally like to have my reverb control separate. I don't like programming reverb control into the show like globally. I'll use this for stuff like if there's a song and they're singing along and then a character interjects with dialogue while everybody else is singing, I'll use this to block out effects for that character that does the dialogue interjection. So you've got the dialogue's nice and crisp while the singing still has a bit of feel to it. Alternatively, if you're doing any fancy stuff, so maybe you've got a character that needs like a tap delay or something, you'll want that tap delay to be on that character, but the other one's not to have any reverb. So, again, a bit like positions, it's not going to. You still have to set up the actual effects and everything on the desk yourself. Like you get full design choice over how that works. All TheatreMix does is it makes it super easy to actually choose when that's applied in the show and not. Cool. I will cover. There's a lot of stuff to cover, but there's not much time. I'll just cover one thing briefly. Is profiles. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. There's a couple of problems profiles solve. So for bigger shows, one of them may, if you were in particularly head-worn mics, people wear hats. And hats plus omnidirectional mics is not a good mix. It's often pretty awful. So often you might want to have a different EQ when that hat comes on. But then as soon as that hat comes off, you want to ditch that EQ straight away. And again, doing this with scenes is kind of painful because if they use the hat multiple times throughout the show, you don't want to have to store the hat preset multiple times and then they have to update it in one scene and then go back and do the other. So with TheatreMix, it has this thing called profiles. So for that, like for the hat case, what you can do is you can define, let's say, Jack hat, and then we can store the EQ for that. So that means that now when you program the show, as well as Jack, there will be a Jack hat. So let's just do here. So I can do Jack hat here. And so it just appears here as a separate item under that channel. But you can just, in the queue list, it just comes up as Jack hat. So when that queue is fired, by default, it does something different. It does the same as any other queue. But if you then go and change the EQ for Jack while he's in this hat queue, it'll capture that EQ change and store it. Then when you go back to Jack being a normal person, it'll recall the EQ you had before. And that's literally based on what is programmed in the queue list. So every time he puts a hat on, you can apply the hat EQ. Every time the hat comes off, you can take it off. And likewise, if you adjust the hat EQ while you're in one scene, it's a common EQ store that's replicated across all the scenes, so you don't have to worry about having to update that at multiple points in the show. Put the hat on, tweak it, sounds good. That'll get used every time this hat profile is recalled. I guess, the main thing is that it's always capturing the changes, so you have to worry about saving or anything like that. Just like if it's in the profile and you change the EQ, you're going to change the common data. It'll be replicated across the whole show. The other thing profiles are useful for is if you need to do mic swaps. So again, if you haven't got many mics or if you've got a big show with a crazy amount of mics, you can use this same feature and you can store more stuff like gain, high pass filter dynamics. And so when a mic swap happens, you can use the sub profile for the future, for the later characters. And again, particularly if you're in an unfortunate position of having to use different mics, different genders, because that shifts your high pass filter, often different dynamics. You can make radical changes to this, to somebody who gets the mic in the future, and then when it goes back to the first person, again, it just recalls it all for you. And particularly back to like the iteration thing, because you only have a few rehearsals to get this right. Every time that swap occurs, you want to refine it just a little bit more. Maybe cut a bit more here, tweak the dynamics threshold. There's always going to be little stuff you want to change. And then you get that one moment in the rehearsal to do it, and then the show's moved on. And see what you want to be able to keep doing that every rehearsal and tweak it as you go and know that data is going to come back. So, that's the whole point of this, is that you can use profiles for this. And cover swaps. I'll do one last trick before we go to any more last questions. So obviously this is all stuff that X32 Theatre Control did, the free version did, before I launched the commercial one. The main benefit of the commercial version is it works across a whole lot more consoles. So if we have an Advantis here, let's just start a trial. So the other consoles use weekly licenses to actually use them. So X32 and 32 is still free. All these other ones, you can build the show files for free. You can get all the data working, do all the GUI stuff. When you want to connect it to a console, that's when I ask you for a small amount of money to cover the costs of building this thing. And so if you go to the website, you can see the pricing and licenses and all that sort of stuff. But it's a bit like the QLab rental arrangement, where you only need the license for the time you're doing the show. So you buy a license for those 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, and the rest of the time you don't need it. So you can always edit your files. You can always get access to your data. It's not like Adobe where you have to keep paying subscription fees forever. You only pay when you use it on a show. So I've just started a trial on Advantis because that's a licensed console. And so now we're currently connected to the X32. If I say here, we've got an Advantis now. Cool. So nothing's changed. All I've done is selected a different console. If I click the button, hopefully.
And this one is not doing anything live, so you can do whatever you want.
So you can probably just, it's really hard to see, but you can see on the right of the picture there, as I advance through queues, you can see the DCA memberships are changing on the right. Yeah, that's it. So this show has been programmed for an X32, and just like that, it's now running on an Advantis. So, if you're moving the show between venues, or if you're touring, or if you're upgrade stuff, it's super easy to transfer shows between consoles. One of the beta testers actually did a lot of school shows, and he built the schools had like X32 consoles, so he'd build the show at the school on the X32 console, do some tech runs with mics, no band, and then when the band came in the following week, he'd bring the Advantis to fit all the channels in, and same show file. Click the button, it works.
That's awesome.
And things to not all the consoles are entirely compatible. In terms of, most of them all have similar features. There's a few exceptions in the feature guide where there's some limitations around, like for instance, the Yamaha TF series don't support delay. Small things like that. But essentially, you can take a show file on one console and put it in any other console. It'll just work. And stuff like if you've stored like EQs in profiles, or there's also actors, which I haven't had a chance to get to. Those EQ curves will have some compensation applied. It's not perfect, but it should hopefully sonically sound very similar if you move them between consoles, because that's often a common complaint is people, if you use an Allen Heath and you go to Yamaha, the EQ sounds different. So I've tried to address that by doing some fancy compensation routines for Q factor and stuff. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question around that?
Sure.
So say someone doesn't have a console in their house and they're looking to program things up and make sure that it's doing something. Could they download the software for the console, depending on the console?
This works only for the Allen and Heath consoles. So generally, most of the manufacturers, the offline editor is just a client. It's just a screen. It connects to the console, all the logic's on the console. But for the Allen and Heath, the GLD, Advantis, and D-Live series, the editor is actually a full implementation of the software stack on at least the control stack of the console. So if you're intending to do a show on one of those consoles, then you can download the editor, activate the trial or a license in TheatreMix, and then connect to the editor on your local computer. It's one of those things people who are new to the software often do this. I get lots of people ask about it in the Facebook group. But once you've done one show, it's usually pretty it seems to be like a beginner's thing. Like once you've done it once, people are pretty comfortable. But at least for those consoles,
the trial and making sure it's doing what you think. Yeah,
and it will. I promise. It doesn't do anything.
No, it's just
the whole point of this software is not to do anything surprising.
But exactly like our demo here, seeing the console do something when you tell it to, that's big, and especially with how easy it is to go from one console to another. Then
it is,
that's fantastic.
And the thing is too is that we've one more thing.
Go ahead.
One thing that's interesting is the value of TheatreMix changes as you go up and down console lists, right? So for me, doing the D-Live was really interesting because D-Live's a very customizable console, so people have a lot of their own workflows in it already. So for whatever reason, you may not want to actually run TheatreMix on a computer to run your show if you're using a D-Live, one of the bigger consoles. But it's still a great programming tool, right? Because you can still program all the stuff in TheatreMix. You can then fire the cues into the console, but then on the console, save them as scenes. If you want to run the show off scenes instead of off TheatreMix, that's cool. But TheatreMix then becomes a programming tool. I think it's better if you use it as the full stack, but you can use it just as a programming tool if you want, if that's your thing. But it's depending on the console and your setup and what you want to do. It has different benefits either way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super powerful. So we've got a few questions. If you don't mind, we'll fire through.
Yeah, sure.
I think they'll all be relatively quick. When switching cues, does it automatically mute / bring down unused mics? So if mic 1 and mic 2 are in Q1, but in Q2 it's only mic 1, when you hit go, does it mute mic 2?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
That is the number one question I get, and I've tried to make it really obvious in the FAQ. But,
yeah. Well, now we've answered
as
it
soon
for
as
a
you
few
use it,
people.
it's super intuitive. But it is a quick. I need to make it a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And aside from delay, does it work on Yamaha TF?
Yes, absolutely. It works in Yamaha TF.
Yeah.
Yep.
We were just saying the only thing that doesn't is the delay, right?
TF is one of those consoles. Like, it's funny when I was like trying to work out which consoles I should support. I wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone buy a Yamaha TF console for theatre. They're not bad, but they're not great. Like there's better options out there. Having said that, though, those TF consoles have ended up in a lot of schools and churches. So I guess if you're stuck with a TF console, then you can use this, and it'll make your life easier.
Yeah, for sure. And with these questions and what you're saying about, like, we've answered these before, that kind of thing, I want to give you a chance to point out to everyone. I know a lot of people here are from the Facebook group, but for those that don't know, there is a fantastic Facebook group where you can pitch your questions, and there's lots of people that can help, and James is on there too. Is there anything you want to say specific to that?
Not really. Just join the group. It's cool. I'm terrible at marketing, so I have a Facebook page and all sorts of stuff. But the group's basically where all the interesting stuff happens. And there's people who've been there who've used it since the X32, like the early days. And so there's people who know the software really well. And so if you have issues or questions, they'll get answered really within 24 hours by people in the group, or me if I've got time. So yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's all the time we have. We've got to call it a night, or a day, wherever you are.
Cool.
But
the only thing I didn't get to cover was QLab. You can control QLab.
Yeah,
with this. So look at the feature guide. Yeah, which is kind of what all this training is about, right?
Yeah. Just very quickly, you can go back and forth between. I think honestly, I've been thinking this entire webinar, we need to do another one and get into more advanced things, because this is great, but I think there's lots more under the hood that people would appreciate getting into.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's particularly if you add stuff like companion and things for control, like you can get really, not complex, but really granular detailed setups into how you control stuff. Yeah, while still maintaining the musicality of the whole principle of the way it works. Yeah,
that's great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. For those that have sent through other questions, we will send them through to James, and we'll get you the answers. And everyone, have a good night, have a good day wherever you are. And if you're interested in QLab, we're doing that the rest of the week. That's on our website, techdirection.com. And join the Facebook group for it's TheatreMix users, right?
Yeah, I'll just go to theatremix.com, and there's a link in the thingy there. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, James. This has been great. Hopefully we can do it again.
Be cool. Hopefully get to see you in person sometime.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll fly across. All right. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.